Welcome to Love and Balance, your go-to podcast for psychology-based, life-enriching information. I'm Brian DeJustin, a certified child, family, and relationship life coach. In each episode, I'll share psychology-supported tips, advice, and insights to help you grow personally, enhance your family life, and strengthen your relationships. Join me as we explore how to love yourself, love others, and live a balanced life. In today's episode, we're going to dive deep into the Fortunata Complex, a psychological pattern where women become emotionally attached to emotionally unavailable or married men. We'll explore how the mind can subconsciously guide individuals to choose the same type of partner repeatedly without even realizing it. And I even share my own personally crafted technique that I developed and use in my coaching to unlock hidden insights and achieve balance. If you've ever wondered why you or someone you know seem to attract the same kind of relationship, stay tuned. Today's topic is a very interesting one, and it's one that will be recognizable in your life, either due to personal experience or because you have seen this played out in someone else's life. But chances are, in one way or another, you've been both spectator and actor in this complex. This complex in specific is my personal favorite one, perhaps out of all of the ones that I will list, and it's one that means a lot to me. As I mentioned in my previous episode about the Cain complex, complexes are psychological characters that exist within us and who we identify with and manifest. I compare life to a theater and complexes to roles. Everybody has a role to play, and these roles interact with each other and unfold all the dramas that occur in life, some dramas being more intense than others. And because complexes consist of certain sets of personality, emotional, and psychological characteristics, it is likely that at one point or another, we have all played this character at some point in our life. However, there are some people whose complex is very deeply ingrained and is present often throughout their whole life, or at least a grand portion of it. And this is especially true with today's complex, the Fortunata Complex. So the term Fortunata Complex is derived from the character Fortunata in Benito Pérez Galdós' novel Fortunata y Jacinta, or Fortunata and Jacinta, the story of two married women. So this book is by far my most favorite absolute novel. This, in my opinion, is the best novel in both English and Spanish literature. It's written in Spanish in Spain by, of course, Benito Pérez. But this novel is by far the best novel in my opinion, from what I've read, both English and Spanish literature. There is no other narrative that I have read that captures the psychological, sociological, personal, and psychohistorical narratives of people the way this book does. I mean, this book is by far my most favorite book, and it is absolutely educational. Anyone that wants to learn more about life and consider philosophically what love means, what life means, and the way our destinies and our complexes unfold and intertwine with other people, I highly, highly recommend Fortunata and Jacinta. So as mentioned, the story takes place between April 1865 and 1876 in Spain. The story is essentially about two married women, Fortunata and Jacinta, in love with the same man. Fortunata's life is characterized by her obsessive and unreciprocated love for a man named Juanito. And this man, Juanito Santa Cruz, is a man who is married and emotionally unavailable. And despite the pain and suffering that this attachment causes her, she remains entangled in this unfulfilling relationship, which again symbolizes the struggle that many women and men may find themselves when drawn to unavailable married men. So what is the Fortunata Complex? The Fortunata Complex is Again, it's not a medical term. It's not in the DSM. Again, it's a psychological complex that refers to a pattern where a woman, again, or man, becomes emotionally attached to another man who is unavailable, whether emotionally or by matrimony. And again, this unavailability may manifest in various forms, but most especially through marriage. This complex was coined by a psychologist named Jorge Barraca Mairal from the University of Madrid. And he based this complex on the character, of course, Fortunata. And the essential component of this is the link between the struggle between independence and dependence. Now, the Fortunata complex is more than just a series of unfortunate choices. It's deeply rooted in our subconscious as well. And it's shaped by past experiences and unresolved emotional conflicts. The Fortunata complex is generally characterized by the following characteristics, which again, Jorge Barraca Mairal from the University of Camilo José Cela in Madrid, Spain, identified. He identified the Fortunata complex as women who are anxious, insecure, have an intense, persistent love towards this married man, have detached attitudes towards other, perhaps better men, have the capacity to abandon all things for the married man, believe that life has no meaning without the man, believe that she has most right to be with him, even more right than the woman he is married with, simultaneously hate and admire the wife. The woman hates the wife for taking him away from her, but also admires her and wants to be her, has optimistic fantasies about the future with this man, and of course, depend on him for any and all emotional validation, whether big or small. Now, what distinguishes this complex between just regular codependence or regular lack of awareness or lack of self-esteem is that the key is that the person is repeatedly getting involved in these kinds of relationships. Also, family lineage can very much influence this. Women can use this to protect herself because they might have seen violence and pain due to parental involvement with men. So they might have seen their father be abusive to their mother, and they might have seen, well, this might be a way to protect myself. Rather than getting involved directly with a man, I should indirectly get involved with him as well through this way. So it's kind of an attachment wound because growing up, they might have seen their father abuse their mother or be unfaithful to their mother. So they might say, well, this Fortunata complex is a way to protect myself because either way, a man will leave me, which of course is not true, but it's what's learned. It's also important for this reason to learn family origins and ancestral patterns in order to break these very same patterns. Because chances are that an intergenerational transmission of family patterns can happen. If your mother was in a similar situation and your grandmother was in a similar situation and your great-grandmother was in a similar situation with a man, then that means that there's a transmitted characteristic, a transmitted complex. That's why it's so important, and that's why there's such a big business around ancestry, around getting to know your family lineage, your family past, your ancestors. It's so important to get to know these because there can be characteristics that are passed down from family member to family member. There's a saying in psychology that says cheating fathers raise cheating sons, and it's true. I've seen it. Cheating fathers had fathers who cheated and who taught them how to cheat. So when they have a son, what do you think they're going to do? Teach them the same thing. So it's so important to learn family origins and ancestral patterns so that we can break them. I mean, for even reference, why do you think there are families of lawyers or families of doctors? Someone's father was a lawyer, and someone's mother was a lawyer, so now they're a lawyer, and their siblings are lawyers, and they're all involved in the family business, or all the entire family of doctors. That's why, because it's intergenerationally transmitted. the same way good things can be passed down, bad things can be passed down as well. And the women who are involved in these types of relationships, of being involved with these men, they usually do it because they feel like it's the only way to trap him or to retain him, that the only way that he can be with her is by being this way. This is the only possible way that they can be together. And these women who are involved with these married and emotionally unavailable men, they have strong, lasting loyalty and dependence on these men. At the same time, they also feel an ambivalence towards the official partner. So they hate her, like I mentioned, because they believe that she has taken something that belongs to her. So either the actual man or even a child. Because remember that the type of men that are involved in these types of relationships are the types of men that say, no, wait, I can't have a kid right now. Just give me some time. I can't right now. Just give me some time. Let me just figure out some things. Let me just be patient. I'm working on it. These are the type of men that say things like that to these women. So the Fortunata woman, the emotionally dependent woman, hates the wife because she feels like the wife is the one that's keeping him away from her, when in reality it's himself that's the one being kept away from her. When in reality it's him keeping himself away from her. But also at the same time, these women want to be the wife. They want to imitate her or at least get along with her. And there's this sort of like sadness that, and this kind of sense of rejection, because the Fortunata woman, the emotionally dependent woman, wants to be the wife. So while they hate her, a part of them also admires the wife and wants to be the wife. And again, this can be conscious or unconscious, and this can also be syntonic or dystonic. Syntonic means that the person likes being involved in this. Dystonic means that the person doesn't like being involved with this. So this can be either likable or unlikable to the person themselves. Fortunata, I mean. And these women don't question the validity of the marriage between him and the wife. They don't question it. They recognize that the man is legally bound to his wife. They do know that the marriage is valid and legal and authentic. They just think it a tragic coincidence that they just so happened to be married at the time that they fell in love. But of course, this isn't just a coincidence, as we'll get into further. These women with the Fortunata complex also fantasize with the change of circumstance. They fantasize and idealize that eventually they will end up together. So it's an emotional link that ties them into a knot between her and the man in this state. And it's a sort of codependence or affective addiction, a love addiction. Again, it's a little different for the reasons that I'll get into and some of the reasons that I mentioned. But it is a variant of codependence. All the woman's thoughts, behaviors, and patterns repeat when involved with these type of men. And again, this can apply to just one long-term situation or many short-term ones. Benito Pérez Galdós, when he wrote Fortunata and Jacinta, he based it on real life things that happened to him, real things that he saw, that he experienced. So by characterizing Fortunata, he characterized a type of emotional dependence. So now getting into the characters of Fortunata and Juanito, which will illuminate the complex even further. Fortunata in the story admits that, and again, these are real people that existed. Fortunata admits that Juanito is the love of her life, despite having lived with other men. Fortunata has been involved in previous relationships before, but all of them were mediocre compared to Juanito. And she is convinced that Juanito, in turn, is in love with her. And this illuminates the first element of the Fortunata Syndrome, or the Fortunata Complex, is this sense of abiding love for this man. And regardless of the time that has elapsed or gone. It doesn't matter how much time she has gone without seeing this married man. The second she sees him, all the love comes back. And again, I say she in referring to Fortunata, but again, this can be men as well, but not always, of course. So despite all this time and despite his marital status, of course, the woman with the Fortunata complex will still love him as intensely. And this, of course, is not reciprocal, despite the woman with the Fortunata complex thinking that the man loves her and cherishes her. He does not. And this is important, especially for women who might be listening to this and identifying with what I'm saying. The man does not love her. And the man does not feel the same way for her as she does for him. And this is best illuminated in the story. In the story, Juanito, in describing Fortunata, describes her as intense, tragic, manic, crazy, romantic, dramatic. He describes her as this tragic, intense woman. When he's telling Jacinta, his wife, about Fortunata, he says the following. He says, "She's got this thing about always loving me the same, just as much as when she first met me for the first time. And that's another thing that affects me and makes me indulgent with her. I mean, just put yourself in my shoes, dear. Now, if I saw that she was flirting with other men, to heck with her. But you can't knock the idea out of being faithful out of her. No, she is faithful to me. Why, for heaven's sake, I assure you that dumb girl has made me ponder it so much. She's always been through so many hands, and yet she's always faithful and hasn't budged an inch in her love. That tragic, manic, romantic state of mind that she has. Neither dishonor nor marriage has cured her of that mania. Doesn't it sound like mania to you?" So again, this is translated from Spanish to English. So it doesn't exactly capture the sarcasm, but for my people who do speak Spanish and who are listening to this, you can imagine the tone that he said it in. Juanito is saying this out of a ridicule. It's almost a sense of pride for him, and it's almost funny and humorous for him to have Fortunata depend on him. So much. And again, he calls her tragic, manic, intense, crazy, dramatic. It's almost overwhelming to him while he desires it and while he likes it and while he feeds off of it. At the same time, it's like a disgust for him. He doesn't like that. He doesn't appreciate it. He's even ridiculing it. He calls her manic. He makes her seem like this crazy girl that's all about him, but at the same time, he goes after her because he needs her for emotional fuel. Getting into this, Juanito also mentions the second element, that these women would drop everything just to be with him. In another instance, Juanito says Fortunata would drop everything. And that one time he even joked around and said, "Let's run away together." And the first reaction that Fortunata had was to grab her shawl and prepare. She didn't pack any bags. She didn't do anything. And when he told her that he was kidding, she just ignored him and laughed it off. So these women are emotionally dependent on these men, so much so that they're willing to drop anything. If that man tells them to go to the end of the world with them, they will. And again, the third element of this is also tied into the story as well. It's these fluctuating feelings of hatred and desire for the wife. In the story, Fortunata, in describing Jacinta, Juanito's wife, says, "That woman has taken away what was mine and what was rightfully mine. But this feeling has blended strangely with another very different and sharper one, namely a burning desire to look like her, to be her. If I had been offered in that moment to transmigrate into the body of someone else, I would have done it automatically, unhesitatingly, and said that I would have wished to be her. I hate her, and yet I like to look at her. I'd like to look at her, to be like her, to let my whole self change until I was exactly like her." So these women, of course, these women who are emotionally dependent on these married men, they see the wife as this perfect example of what the husband likes. But at the same time, they see themselves as giving the husband what the wife can't. And again, Fortunata also does this. At the end of the book, when Fortunata confronts Jacinta during this dramatic confrontation, she says, "Angelic, yes, you are angelic all you like, but you don't have any children. That is why you are an angel. A childless wife isn't a wife. And you can say what you like, but what I think is, and nobody can change my mind, is that you are virtuous, yes, agreed, but you cannot give him a son. I could. I gave him one, and I can give him another whenever I please." And then it's this dramatic battle between the two of them. But as you can see, Fortunata, while admiring and wanting to be the wife, at the same time hates her for keeping him away from her. And the important thing to note is that this complex is not equivalent to romantic love. This is not Romeo and Juliet. This is not, this type of love is not the same as any story that you've heard. No, it's not the same. It's very different. And also, it's different again in the sense of being second place. There's some women that like being second place. There's some women that are perfectly comfortable with being second place in the man's life. And there's even cultures that have the concept of second wife, third wife, fourth wife. And these wives are okay, but there's even rules that the husbands must follow many times in these cultures in regards to spending time with each wife equally, giving equal gifts to equal wife. And the wives have rights. The wives have privileges. Each wife has a role. So it's different. It's not the same thing. That's why the Fortunata Complex is so unique. It's a form of codependency, but it's not codependency. It's a form of attachment, but it's not attachment. It's a form of being second place, but it's not second place. It's different because Fortunata isn't happy being second place. She's not happy being second place. She doesn't want to be second place. She wants to be first place. So her whole life is like a struggle to be first place in his life. Actor Salman, another psychoanalyst, he characterizes the other women, so the women that men cheat on their wives with, as anxious, having low self-esteem, insecure, borderline, ambivalent, again, fluctuating between admiration and hate, love and hate. He ties this not only to unsatisfied needs, but also the desire to feel punished. There is a guilty feeling sometimes underneath this, that perhaps the woman isn't worthy of a good husband, so she needs to settle for worse. And these women are also constantly available to these men, and they have recurring thoughts about him, about when he will leave his wife, and of course his enthusiasm about it. These women really think that the husband is enthusiastic and really wants to be with them, but in reality these men don't. There is so many evidence both in Fortunata and Jacinta and these situations where there is so much evidence that points to the contrary, that these men do not want to leave their wives. But these women are so assured that these men are just as enthusiastic as they are about them leaving their wives. There's even a part of the story where Fortunata has a dream where she's walking in the plaza, and as she's walking, she sees a carriage, and in this carriage is Juanito. And Juanito calls to her, and she gets in the carriage, and they go away together. They run away together. Later that day, she goes to the same plaza, and guess who she sees? Juanito. And the same scenario happens. He's in the carriage, and he calls to her, and she goes with him. Except she doesn't actually run away with him. They just go to an apartment that he bought for her so they can be together. So these women are constantly available to these men. Whenever that man texts her, calls her, messages her, makes himself available to her, she's ready. These women drop anything and everything just to be with this man. And the most ironic and tragic thing about this is that they're capable of tolerating the situation. And remember, these men always prolong it. These men always have a reason. Whenever they say, okay, give me till August. In August, I'll do it. When August comes, something will come up and they'll extend it to December. Okay, December, I'll do it. I'll do it in December. Give me time. And then when December comes, okay, let me just give me till March. I need till March. And these women are capable of tolerating the situation despite how long it goes and despite the length of time that they have to go through these things. They still will tolerate it because they idealize this man. They idealize this man so strongly to the point where they're using this vision of this future, this false promise, as a psychological crutch. They're using these psychological crutches as hope for their future, that one day, whenever that day will come, that they will run away with him and be happily ever after. But that is not true. And what happens is that as they keep depending on this psychological crutch, they gradually give more and more value to the reasons that the man provides them rather than their own reasoning. Even if they're right and the man is wrong, they will find some justification, some reasoning to say, you know what, he is right. He is right. I'm the one that's wrong. And again, it's based on that emotional dependence. Another interesting thing about the Fortunata Complex is that these women are usually socioeconomically lower than the man. Not always, but usually. Fortunata in the story is, of course, lower class, not very educated, doesn't have a lot of money, and Juanito is of the upper society. These women are in turn usually less educated, younger, very young, and the man is usually older than them, more stable, more well off. And again, another thing that really makes this complex unique is that people have pointed out that single women feel more empowered when they have sex with married men. But this is different. Fortunata is not single. She is in a relationship with him. There is a goal. It's not just sex. It's so much more than that. It's emotional dependence. So it's important to make sure that we're not confusing it with other things. This is not about a single woman having sex with a married man and feeling better about herself and more confident. No, this is so much more to that. Fortunata is not single, and neither are these women. And another thing about these men too, since we're on the topic, is that these men have common traits as well. These men are seductive, emotionally intelligent, secretive, very convincing, and very good at hiding the truth. These men almost always have the following characteristics. They're very suave, they're very romantic, they're very passionate, and they know exactly how to speak to someone to make them think that they have fallen in love with them. They're very charming, they're very suave, they're very considerate when they want to be. But they're also very secretive, and they're very, very good at hiding the truth. They're very convincing. They know exactly how to make people who are the least convincing people ever, who are the least possible people to be manipulated. These men know how to make those people who know everything feel like they know nothing. They know exactly what to say, how to act, how to be, to make even the smartest people believe them, that they are really in love. These men will often say the following things, and this is a pattern that is followed because they have their own complex too, which I'll get into the next episode. But these men will often say the following things. I'll leave my partner, but give me some time. My children are the ones tying me down. The relationship is poor and we're living more like friends or siblings. I don't want to hurt my wife because that would destroy her, so just give me time. We work together, we have a business together, we have a economy, we share checks, we share bank accounts, so I'm kind of stuck because of my financial situation, or my wife is sick and I need to take care of her. That is almost always the excuses and the things that the men say to stay with their wife. They always say that they'll leave their partner eventually, just give them time, that for the children, they need to stay for their kids, that their kids are the one tying them down, that the relationship is bad, and they usually tell this to the lover, the other woman. They usually tell this to the other woman when the other woman questions if they love their wife. They'll usually tell them no, that the relationship is poor, it's sexless, it's passionless, and that they live more like friends or siblings rather than actual lovers. And the reason why they don't break up with her is because they don't want to hurt her, because that would just destroy her. So just give them time. Or another reason that they give is that, oh, we work together, we have a same business, we've built a business together, I can't lose my business, etc., etc. It's always a reason. Or eventually, another famous one is that the wife is sick and he needs to take care of her. She has cancer, they need to take care of her. Whatever invention. These men are smart. They know exactly what to say. But these are almost always the same patterns that they will follow and the same or similar things that they will say. In the same way, there's a Fortunata complex. There's also something called a Don Juan complex, which I'll get into the next episode. And the Don Juan complex is the types of men that get involved in these relationships. The other side of the equation, the promises that these men make do not ever occur. That's the important thing to remember, that the promise changes that the men say that they will do never ever take place. And if they do, they're either short-term or just situational, so that the other woman can feel satisfied. Because eventually what happens is that all the lies and all the concealment are exposed and new information will appear. Usually towards the end of the relationship between the Fortunata woman and the Juanito man, the lies and the concealment are exposed. All this new hidden information, all the lies are revealed. So for example, the other woman, the Fortunata woman, will realize that he had other children, that he had other mistresses, that his family covered up his affairs for him, that his friends covered up the affairs for him, that everybody knew but nobody said anything. And the reasons for the marital strain and the supposed problems that he had with his wife are fake, that they never had problems, and if they did, they were different than what he told the other women. But yet, despite all of this, the Fortunata woman will stay with him. And the way the man achieves this is by reinforcement and short-term gratification. After they fight, after they break, he'll give her all the reassurance, all the validation, all the love that she demands of him, just so she can be quiet for a moment and feel happy. Because again, one of the characteristics of these women is that they conform and accept little, but in turn give him a lot. The man maintains control over the woman, the other woman, by reinforcement and short-term gratification. And this is how the woman learns how to depend on him and submit to him and sacrifice herself for him. Another thing that these men will do is make the girl feel pity or guilt towards him. So they'll make her pity him and say, no, I'm struggling, I suffer. When I was little, I struggled. When I was little, I was poor. Or they'll make some type of excuse to make the other woman feel bad for him or guilt her into staying with him. But the most sad thing about all of this is that attachment to these type of men delay the life progression of the woman. Being with these men will detract the other woman from her life goals, her life dreams, her life purpose, because all of that becomes him. How is it perpetuated in life? How is it continued? How does it live out in life? It lives out through multiple ways and often subconscious. Firstly, through repetition compulsion. Repetition compulsion is a concept from psychoanalysis where an individual unconsciously repeats patterns of behavior or relationships from their past, often in an attempt to resolve the unresolved conflicts. So in the case of Fortunata Complex, a woman may repeatedly seek out unavailable men as a way to replay and perhaps fix a relationship dynamic that began in childhood, most likely with a distant or emotionally unavailable parent. Another way it's perpetuated is through life scripts. Life scripts are unconscious life plans that are developed in childhood and influenced by family dynamics and early experiences. These scripts can dictate the types of relationships we seek out as adults. So, for example, a woman whose life script includes the belief that she must earn love by overcoming obstacles and by sacrificing herself for a man that doesn't appreciate her may obviously unconsciously choose partners who are emotionally unavailable that reinforce this script. Another way, which is something I talk about in an upcoming book, through a concept called personal mythology. Personal mythology refers to the stories we tell ourselves about who we are based on our life experiences. These narratives are deeply ingrained in our subconscious and can drive our choices and relationships. So the woman with a personal mythology centered around being the rescuer or being the savior may find herself drawn to men who need fixing or saving, even if it leads to unfulfilling relationships. Also, another topic too is the internal parental couple. The concept of the internal parental couple refers to the internalized representations of our parents' relationships. They are the version of our parents that exists inside us, and these internal models can influence the kind of relationships we seek as adults. If a woman grew up in a household where one parent was emotionally unavailable, she might unconsciously seek partners who replicate this dynamic because it feels familiar or normal to her. Another thing also is attraction to familiar pain. Often, people are subconsciously drawn to what is familiar, even if it causes pain. So the emotional landscape of an unavailable partner might mirror the emotional environment of the woman's upbringing, making it feel like home, even if it's unhealthy. And of course, another thing as well is family lineage. As mentioned, if your mother was in a relationship with an unavailable man and your grandmother was and your great-grandmother was, chances are you will as well. So family lineage is, of course, important. Now, a big one, however, is the principle of homeostasis. Homeostasis is our body's condition of staying the same, staying at peace, staying comfortable. And this principle of staying the same is especially manifest when we learn from childhood certain things that take place in adulthood. And this principle of staying the same on a mental level is learned from childhood. For example, someone who grew up watching fairy tales and stories of chivalry and knights and princesses might have more theatrical and dramatic relationships than someone who grew up in a home or a family or a culture where that wasn't important because it wasn't learned. And if it wasn't learned, it wasn't expected. Someone who did grow up with that does expect that. So as I've mentioned, complexes have much to do with what we learn in life. And this ties into a very important and significant portion of this episode. Because this specific complex is tied to Spanish/Latin American culture, I personally would say that it is most prevalent in those places. Now, this doesn't mean that it is not possible for someone in New Zealand to have this complex. No. I just mean that this culture that exists in Spanish/Latin American societies and the unique societal and cultural environment that exists in countries like Spain, Colombia, Cuba, etc., are ripe with cultural, social, political, and emotional elements that can facilitate this complex and the events associated with it in a way that is more available than, say, the United States, Canada, Britain, Norway, etc. Especially since this has to do so much with emotionality. Emotionality is the energy and potency of emotions, passions, and sentiments. In traditionally Anglo-Saxon countries like the one I mentioned, United States, Canada, Britain, etc., emotions are more refined. Historically, in pre- and post-Victorian societies and cultures, so as I said again, United States, Britain, Australia, etc., the refinement and repression of passions and emotions was culturally cultivated. Thus, the people in these societies are more individualized, more discreet emotionally, more unemotional, more repressed, etc. Now, alternatively, in Iberian/Latin American societies, they have deep historical roots in Mediterranean cultures. Additionally, John Gottman of the Gottman Institute, a leading researcher in the science of love and couples therapy, where I personally received training from, found that the most romantic people live in Spain and Italy. Because the cultures are this way, so too are the people who are the products of their cultures. That's why so many people go on honeymoons, marital vacations, romantic vacations, etc. to these places, because it's romantic. And since the culture and the places are romantic, so are the people. Also, the cultures of the Mediterranean have deep Roman Catholic Moorish traditions, and all of which place significant importance on family, community, and the open expression of emotions. So this historical backdrop has fostered a societal norm where emotions are seen as a natural, essential part of human interaction. The colonization of the Americas by Spain, of course, brought with it the cultural values and norms of the Iberian Peninsula, including the Catholic faith. Catholicism, with its rituals, celebrations, and emphasis on community and family, further reinforced the expressions of emotions as a communal experience. Festivals, religious ceremonies, and even mourning practices, which are called in Spanish luto, are deeply emotional and are shared by the community, creating an environment where emotional expression is both expected and accepted. In these luto practices, women would wear all black as a social demonstration of her mourning. Additionally, the Mediterranean society is a Catholic society, so the people that grew up in these societies and their derivatives, like Latin America, are raised not only with fusions of ancient Roman religious practices with Christianity, so the lighting of candles, the celebration of special days, etc., but also grew up with legendary stories of the lives of saints. So, for example, the story of Rapunzel is actually the fantastical version of the legend of Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara was a princess whose father locked her in a tower for being Christian, and the way she was able to learn about Christ and his mother was by letting down a golden thread down her window to other people who would tie the books to the thread, and she will pull them back up to her chamber. Now, in contrast, Anglo-Saxon societies shaped by Protestantism and Protestant Christianity, of course, disregarded all Roman traditions, and of course the legendary stories of Christ, Mary, the saints, etc. were not placed as important, and these reformed societies lost all priority of these. The values of the Enlightenment era, which shifted society's focus on science over romanticism, started in these very same Protestant societies. This era historically emphasized and catalyzed a sense of individualism, self-restraint, and the rational management of emotions. The Victorian era in particular cultivated a culture of emotional repression, where emotions were viewed as something to be controlled or subdued in favor of rationality and decorum. This cultural norm has persisted in many traditionally Anglo-Saxon countries, where emotional expression is often more subdued and private. For example, look at American society in the very early 1900s and the family. Nobody expressed emotion, nobody expressed passion. Everything was very cut, clear, concise, and regulated. There was no such thing as romantic displays of affection. That didn't exist. This was a product of Victorian ideals transmigrated into the 20th century. So emotionality in Spanish and Latin American cultures is characterized by a high level of energy and intensity, which reflects the cultural value placed on passion and vitality. And again, this contrasts with the more refined and restrained emotionality of Anglo-Saxon cultures, where emotions are often expressed in a more controlled and understated manner. The social norms in Spanish and Latin American societies celebrate and encourage the open expression of emotions, whether in joy, sorrow, anger, or love, making these cultures particularly rich in emotional expression. So I believe that the prototype of the suave Latin man arises from here. In Iberian and Latin American societies, the prototype of the suave Latin man is already normalized. So this prototype doesn't necessarily exist there, since that is already part of custom. But it exists in these Anglo-Saxon derived societies, so United States, Britain, etc., because the suave Latin man represents the emotionality that is not found here. He represents a foreign, both figuratively and literally foreign, sense of passion. And this newfound love that was previously unknown is now found. How many movies are based on this? The girl leaves the country, goes on vacation, falls in love in this foreign country, but she's married and now she's conflicted emotionally because her heart is here, but her obligations are back home. And it's this whole drama. And sometimes it's not even just in the movie. Actually, many times it's real life. I'm pretty sure we've heard someone in real life match that as well. You know what? Actually, there's a reality TV show called Love Under Cuban Skies, and it talks about this exact topic. Women who travel to Cuba looking for love and romance. Like I said, life is a play, and these complexes are the characters we interpret. All the dramas that happen in life are just the interactions of these characters. And now that I'm on the topic of Cuba, which is going to be a big point in my future publications, Cuban culture and society can also be closely tied to the Fortunata Complex through several cultural, historical, and social dynamics that shape interpersonal relationships there. The Fortunata Complex involves repetitive, emotionally intense relationships, often with unattainable or unsuitable partners, which can be seen as deeply influenced by the specific characteristics of Cuban culture. For instance, there's a cultural emphasis on passion and emotional intensity. Cuban society is known for its vibrant culture where passion and emotional expressiveness and strong family bonds play a significant role. These characteristics, of course, can contribute to the Fortunata Complex, where individuals might find themselves repeatedly involved in intense, tumultuous relationships. The cultural value placed on intense emotions and these dramatic expressions of love can lead to a cycle of seeking out relationships that reflect these cultural ideals, even when they may be unhealthy or unsustainable. Another big cultural factor as well is the concept of machismo and gender roles. The traditional machismo culture in Cuba reinforces certain gender roles that can exacerbate the Fortunata Complex. In this context, women might find themselves repeatedly drawn to men who embody that archetypal man, strong, dominant, and often emotionally unavailable or unfaithful. There's a cultural expectation for men to assert their masculinity through sexual conquest and dominance, which can create a dynamic where women who are influenced by these cultural norms repeatedly engage in relationships with men who cannot fully commit, thus perpetuating the cycle of the Fortunata Complex. Another thing as well is, like I mentioned, the other women in these circumstances are usually poor. And of course, in Cuba, there's socioeconomic hardship. So that further facilitates the development of the Fortunata Complex as well. Another thing as well is the romantic idealism that exists in Cuban culture. Again, Cuban culture often romanticizes love and relationships, and it's influenced by literature, music, and cinema that especially detail these intense, all-consuming love stories. This romantic idealism can lead individuals to seek out or remain in relationships that mirror these narratives, even when those relationships are destructive. The Fortunata Complex can be fueled by the desire to live out these romantic ideals, leading to a pattern of involvement with partners who fit the romanticized but ultimately unattainable or unsuitable ideal. I will speak much about Cuba in later publications, as I have several things in mind regarding this because it provides so much material both for learning and reality, psychology, and philosophy, so stay tuned. But going back, For the reason I just mentioned, this is what I mean when I say that this complex is more prevalent in people who grew up in these cultures. Now, it doesn't mean that it's impossible for it to happen outside of them, but it just means that it's more common to see. Unresolved trauma also plays a role in this as well. Unresolved trauma can lead to a cycle where a person is repeatedly drawn to relationships that recreate the trauma. The hope, often unconscious, is that this time the outcome will be different, but without addressing the underlying issues, the cycle continues. Another thing as well is attachment theory. Attachment theory also provides a lens to understand the Fortunata Complex. Often, women with this complex have a history of insecure attachment, especially anxious styles, and they may have experienced inconsistent caregiving in childhood, which leads them to seek validation and love from unavailable partners in adulthood. There's also an approach and withdrawal pattern that occurs. The more the Fortunata woman approaches the Juanito man, the more he withdraws. Because again, the Don Juan man, or the married man in this situation, is usually narcissistic and needs that validation of, it doesn't matter what I do, she's always going to chase me. So they will use that to their advantage. Now, conversely, these men have an avoidant attachment style, and the women have anxious ones. So like I mentioned, the more the woman anxiously approaches him, the more he will avoidantly withdraw. And that's usually the case. Men are usually the ones withdrawing, and the woman is usually the one approaching. Fortunata's tragic attachment to Juanito and Fortunata y Jacinta serves as a powerful literary example of this complex. Despite knowing that Juanito will never fully commit to her, she remains emotionally entangled in this sacrificial relationship with him, sacrificing her own happiness in the process. And it is actually this very same principle of knowing that Juanito will never be hers that keeps her going and longing for him. In Sigmund Freud's publication, Beyond the Pleasure Principle, he says that one of the strongest setbacks in human nature is the wanting of something you can't have. The more forbidden something is, the more it is desired. The more taboo and exotic something is, the more allure it has. That's why I tell all my parents who I coach about something called the Romeo and Juliet effect, which is when your son or daughter has a boyfriend or girlfriend that you don't like and you prohibit them from seeing them. This actually makes your child want to stay with them even more. So I tell my parents who I work with in my life coaching practice that if you want your son or daughter to stay away from their boyfriend or girlfriend, the more you prohibit them from seeing them, the more they will want to defy you. Because it's fundamentally by the nature of prohibition itself that makes them want to stay. By prohibiting something, you make people want to do it even more. Just look at all the times we go to an amusement park and you read the signs that say, don't sit on the railings. How many people sit on the railings? Just by looking at that sign, you're drawing people's attention to sit on the rails. The emotional toll of the Fortunata Complex can be significant. It's a self-perpetuating cycle of hope and disappointment that leads to feelings of inadequacy, depression, and anxiety. These repeated patterns can erode the self-esteem that's already pretty low to begin with, and reinforces negative beliefs about oneself, such as the idea that one is unworthy of a fully available and committed partner. This complex can lead to a pattern of failed relationships where the woman repeatedly chooses partners who are unable to meet her emotional needs, and over time, this can erode her ability to trust and form healthy, balanced relationships. The Fortunata Complex doesn't just affect romantic relationships. It can spill over to other areas of life, like career and friendships, because again, the person sacrifices all of these for the married man. And of course, the married man never completes his promises. Now, how do we break the cycle? The first step in breaking the cycle is recognizing the pattern. Reflect on your past relationships and identify any recurring themes or dynamics. Rewrite your life script. Challenge the life scripts that no longer serve you. Work on creating new, healthier narratives that empower you to seek out relationships that are nurturing and fulfilling. Evaluate the relationship and how it started. How did it start? Pay attention to the details. Really write down and analyze, how did it start? Did it start out healthy or did it start out bad, because whatever starts bad ends bad. So really evaluate how it started and handle the pain. This process of healing is going to be painful. Handle the pain. Be aware of the problem and the distress that's going to come with breaking off that connection, because it's so much more than just cutting people off or just letting him go. This is something that people don't understand. A lot of people just say, no, why doesn't she just let him go? Why doesn't she just forget about him or just block him? It's so much more than that. The person has to commit to the process of healing, being aware of reality, occupying themselves with things that make them a better person, doing things on their own, and preventing any future relapses in reconnecting with the married man. Support groups are great for this too, because it makes you feel like you're not alone in this journey, you're not alone in this process. And again, remember, these men use passion and sex as control too. So recreate that passion and that self-confidence in your own life by yourself. Invest in activities and relationships that build your self-esteem, that reinforce your self-worth. Remember that if you are identifying with this, you deserve to be in a relationship where your needs are met and your value is recognized. Everybody does. And also, consider working with someone who is knowledgeable about this subject and who can operate from a place of understanding. You know, people on the outside, like I said, will say, just leave him, forget him, you're so pathetic. But it's not just that simple. So talk to someone who understands. Now, here is my personal crafted technique that I implement in my coaching with people that you can do by yourself today. A very important thing for anything, any obstacle, any challenge, or any goal that you have is practicing and developing self-awareness. Practicing mindfulness and self-reflection increases your awareness of the choices you make in life and in relationships. Understanding the why behind your choices is the key to making healthier decisions. So how do you do this? So this is my technique in order to achieve that. Get a piece of paper and write down all the Juanito Santa Cruzes that you've been involved with, all of the men, whether it's one or whether it's multiple. Write down all of the men that you've been involved with that match this unattainable, emotionally unavailable man. Write down the very first one all the way up to the very last one, like a timeline. And beneath or beside every single one, you're going to write down a few things. First, write what they meant to you. Next, write what the relationship taught you. Do this for every single one until you have an entire set of words or sentences laid out before you. Once you do, look at the page as a whole. Notice if there are any similar words, same words, or same sentences that are just mixed up, or if you notice connections between all of them. When you do, and you have the common denominator set, that will reveal to you what you lack and what you need to focus on. Whatever common denominator exists in the prototype of the Juanito Santa Cruz men, Fortunata lacks. So you're able to see through this exercise what you lack and what you have and what you're looking for in them. Remember, the Fortunata woman looks in Juanito what she doesn't have in herself. So when you notice that you have a common denominator among all the men you've been with, you can clearly see what is lacking. Take care also to notice how you write the words. Do you write them heavy? Do you write them light? What direction do your sentences slant? Are the words for one man written messy and the other one written organized? These all reveal unconscious content, which I interpret for my clients in my life coaching. And whatever insights you get during this practice, include it in your life and in your recovery. So in this episode, we explored the Fortunata Complex and how subconscious patterns like repetition compulsion, life scripts, culture, and personal mythology can influence our choice of partners. By becoming aware of these patterns, we can begin to break unhealthy cycles and create healthier, more fulfilling relationships. If this episode resonated with you, or if you know someone who could benefit from understanding the Fortunata Complex, please share this episode. For more insights and to explore how I can help you on your journey to healthier relationships, visit the links in the description below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Have you recognized any of the patterns in your own life? Share your experiences or questions with me on social media. I'm also offering a free 30-minute consultation and 3 free sessions for new clients. If you're ready to take the next step in your personal growth journey, book your free session with me today through the link in the description. Next week, we'll be diving into the Don Juan Complex, where we'll explore the type of men involved in these relationships. The men who avoid commitment and engage in a series of affairs and casual relationships. If you've ever found yourself or someone you know caught in a cycle of romantic conquests, be sure to stay tuned and listen. Thank you for joining me on Love and Balance. Blessings.